Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Relish the Journey. As always, I'm your host, Myles Biggs, and my guest today is Patrick O'Donnell. He's a retired police officer with over 25 years of experience on the force, and now in retirement, he is an author. And not just an author, but he is a technical advisor for other authors and screenwriters. So, Patrick, it's great to have you on the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Myles. It's an honor and a privilege.
So how does a police officer, drop the sword for the pen, to go for the metaphor, right?
That is funny. I like that.
Tell us the story there.
It's not something that happened quickly or lightly. I'm a big believer in digging the well before you're thirsty, and retirement was looming on the horizon after I had about 18, 19 years on the job. I had definite plans of retiring at 25 years. It's not mandatory, and I didn't dislike my job, but it was time. I knew at 25 years that'd be enough, and I was more than willing to walk away from it. And the first book that I wrote was, well, I'll back up a little bit. I went to college at UW-Whitewater here in Wisconsin, got my 4-year degree in sociology. I had a minor in criminal justice, and I started out as a music major, but I almost had enough credits for another music minor. So I graduated from college. I got married shortly after, and I'm armed with a degree in sociology looking for police jobs. Back then, they were hard to find. There wasn't a whole lot of them. So one of the jobs that I had, I worked as a IHOP manager. I worked at Pizza Hut as a manager. I sold cars for 4 years, and I bartended on weekends, especially during slow times, just to pay the bills, because not a whole lot of people are buying cars in Wisconsin in January. It just doesn't happen a whole lot. Not a whole lot of people do a whole lot of anything then. So fast forward, I'm a police officer, and I never stopped helping people buy cars. So whenever you have that certain skill, it gets out, and it's like, hey, aren't you that guy who used to sell cars? I'm like, yeah, that was me. And it's like, hey, I'm looking at this. Could you help me with that? And I'm like, sure, not a problem. So what wound up happening was I wound up helping a lot of people, not just like, family, which of course I would do, but a lot of friends and friends of friends and friends of friends and colleagues. And somebody one time just said, man, you should really write a book about this. And I'm like, you know what? You're right. I think I should. So I wrote a book. It was called I Never Wore Plaid, Insider Secrets from a Former Car Salesperson. And, the formatting wasn't great. The editing was okay. But I learned, well, first, I had my eye on an agent and a publicist. And I thought to myself, all right, this is going to go good. Another police officer that's a very good friend of mine, one of his best friends owned her own publishing company, and she had an agent in New York. And she also wrote children's books and educational books. And she says, you know what? So I tell my buddy, I think, give her the manuscript, see what she thinks. So she called me, and much to my surprise, and she said, I really like it. I'm going to New York next week, and I will take it to my agent and see what we could do for you. And I'm like, no way. So I thought to myself, man, it's just simple. I never thought it'd be this easy. So, I'm going to make all kinds of money. This will be great.
Right.
I'm on Easy Street. I literally went to International Autos, and I'm like looking at BMWs and Porsches, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is going to be awesome. So the day before she leaves, my friend and her get into a gigantic fight, and he called me up and he says, yeah, I don't think your chances are too good anymore. And I'm like, oh. So I called her and I said, hey, I know you and Mike had a blowout, but I hope this doesn't tarnish our relationship. And she says, oh yeah, it does. I already threw that in the garbage.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, okay. So, and I was a little sad, but I soldiered on, and I thought to myself, well, how can I do this without an agent? Then just by doing some research. This is like, what was it, 5-6 years ago? I found out that you can put your book on Amazon without an agent. You can self-publish. And I didn't even know that was a thing. So I self-published it, and it still sells like 1 to 5 books a month, something like that. It's not breaking the bank, but that is like total passive income. I don't advertise it. I don't do anything with it.
Sure. So for people out there that are thinking about writing a book And, I feel like there's not a whole lot of information out there like this. So if you don't mind sharing, if you sell 5 books a month, you're making what, 100 books a month on the book? How much do you bring home in that scenario?
If I've got it for sale for $2.99, I get 70% of the commission. So I get 70%, and Amazon keeps 30%. So you can do the math. Traditional published deals, usually, if you go with an agent and you get a publisher, it's the exact opposite. You get 30% and they keep 70%.
Right.
The advantage to having a publicist and an agent is they will do some of the or all the advertising for you. They'll get a book cover for you. They'll get the editing. They'll write the blurb for you. Your job is to write the book. And if you're proven, you have a track record with them, they'll give you money up front in the hopes that, the book is going to sell. So you might get an advance of, say, $3,000 to $5,000. And if you don't cover the advance, you're not going to be working with them anymore. That'll be the end of that.
Right.
Whereas if you're an independent author like me, you do everything. You have to find your own editor, your own copywriter. If you wish to do the book description, you have to figure out your own book cover, the formatting, and of course the marketing and advertising. That's a huge chunk of it.
Sure.
So there, nothing's for free. And a lot of times too, and I've talked to a lot of authors that started out with an agent and they became disillusioned because after the second or third month, after it's pushed, then it goes on the back burner and they don't care about you anymore.
And I just talked to an author and he said he'll never go through a formal publishing house again because it's like they don't even really market it for you. They expect you to have a big audience already that you can draw upon, and then you don't own all your work. They're making the money. He's like, at this point, I'm just going to do it myself. So I think more and more people are realizing the power of listing it on Amazon and because there's more than just Amazon too, where you could sell it. So there's plenty of options out there.
You can go specifically, like say, I just want to be on Apple Books, or I want to be in Barnes and Noble, or Kobo is big in Canada. There's different publishers out there than Amazon, but Amazon does have about 70% of the book market right now. So they own a big chunk of, if you want to get published, you have to be on Amazon. Well, if you want to sell, you should be on Amazon.
Sure.
But the thing about it is there's also companies like Grafted Digital that you just submit all of your stuff to them, your manuscript, the cover, all that good stuff, a finished product, and they will put it out not only Amazon, but they'll also do like what I said before, Barnes and Noble, Apple Books, any other smaller, compared to Amazon, everybody else is a little bit smaller when it comes to publishing books. But the trade-off is if you're not exclusive with Amazon, you can't be in Kindle Unlimited. And Kindle Unlimited is where you get paid by the word. If you have your book in Kindle Unlimited, there's Kindle Unlimited is a subscription service for readers where they pay, I think it's $10 a month or $15 a month. I'm not really sure, to tell you the truth. And as long as the book is in Kindle Unlimited, that's for whale readers, that are voracious readers where they read like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 books a month, sometimes even more than that. And they find books that are in this Kindle Unlimited program. It's cheaper for them. And then as far as the author doesn't get paid the 70% commission, they get paid by the word. So that's the advantage to that. But if you're not exclusive to Amazon, you won't get that. So say you want to be Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple, that's fine, but you can't be in Kindle Unlimited.
And on the flip side of that, I've talked to people that have bookstores and they don't want to buy your book from Amazon to keep it in their store because Amazon's a competitor. They want to buy it from another service that, is more brick and mortar friendly. So there's just so many different ways to publish your book, and everybody's got their own preference. It's interesting.
But it's funny because now, that's just ebooks that I'm talking about. Paperback, you don't have to be exclusive with Amazon to sell them in other venues. You don't have to have that exclusivity. So that gives you some freedom. And audiobooks, I do audiobooks as well. And as far as the audiobooks go, I go through ACX, which is a subsidiary of Amazon. Audible is probably the biggest what you hear of usually when it comes to audiobooks. And again, a subscription service. And I have 3 books that are on ACX, and they're exclusive to Audible. So I decided to go with them.
So how do you make money on an audiobook? Is it per like stream of the book? Is that how that works?
Um, there's a couple of different ways. People will buy an audiobook either through, they'll just pick what book they want. And if they don't have a subscription, they'll pay the amount, like say $15 or $20 or whatever it is. Or they're in the subscription service. Like I have a subscription to Audible. I think it's $15 a month, and that gives me 1 credit a month. And 1 credit could be used for a book that's $7.99, an audiobook that's $7.99, or $25.99. So as far as getting paid, I get paid whatever. I think the last audiobook that I have is on there for $7.99, and I only get paid 30% of that. Reason being is when you're looking for a narrator, you can narrate it yourself, but you definitely need the equipment. Their quality control is very high. I wouldn't be able to do it at my like right now I'm at my kitchen table. That's my studio for now, and I don't have the equipment to do it. And it takes a long time, and there's a definite skill set to doing it, and I don't have the time or the inclination to learn it. And like I said before, I don't have the equipment. So in order to get a narrator, you can do it one of a couple of different ways. One, you can just hire one, and they're not cheap. A decent narrator for a 60,000 word book will probably cost you about $3,000-$4,000, sometimes more, like $5,000-$6,000. So they're not cheap. Or you can do a royalty split where you pay your narrator nothing up front, and he or she will split 50-50. So you each get 25% or 30%, whatever. Then ACX gets the rest. So what I've been doing is I just do a royalty split. As far as the audiobook goes, I don't sell a ton of them, but they're good for a couple of different things. I mean, I love audiobooks. I used to have a half an hour to an hour commute both ways to work. So that's how I kind of got into audiobooks. And they're very easy to consume. I mean, everybody's got a smartphone. So it's right there. I think it's an up and coming technology. But as far as the last couple of books that I wrote are nonfiction. So having an audiobook next to the paper book and the Kindle version and Amazon, it's also social proof. If somebody sees it, it's like, oh, that guy must know what he's talking about. He's got the audiobook, he's got the paperback, he's got the Kindle. So instead of just one person just having the Kindle version,
right?
Having all the versions, that gives you a little bit of, like I said before, some social proof that, hey, this guy's pretty decent. Gives you some credibility.
Yeah, it makes people more apt to spend the $8-10 or whatever it might be to take a chance on your book.
Absolutely.
So when it comes to being a technical advisor for other authors and screenwriters, I'm assuming that's when they're trying to write or portray a story that involves police work. Is that the case?
Yes, that is correct.
So what's that like? Somebody can bring you a script and they've got this fantastical notion of the way it actually is on the streets as a police officer, and you come in and say, actually, we would never do it that way,
I've worked with authors, and I've worked a little bit with screenwriters. I helped one person. They were doing a movie down in Chicago, and it was an independent filmmaker. And through a mutual friend, it's like, hey, you know what? Pat really knows what he's doing when it comes to the police stuff. This is his wheelhouse. So he did the intros, and this filmmaker sent me like a 5-minute clip of his movie, and it was just god awful terrible. Oh my God. It was bad. It was really bad. Like, his actors are pointing guns at each other. A lot of the firearm stuff was totally wrong. You had a police officer talking into a police radio without an antenna. So I was very nice. I'm like, dude, you gotta really take care of this situation, because anybody that knows anything about police work is just going to laugh at this. And he says, well, I have a cop on set with me. And I'm like, he ain't a very good one, or he's sleeping at the wheel, dude. So whatever. The majority of my work is with authors. And I mean, to give you an example, the last person I worked with, she lives in England, and she's writing a novel, and she didn't know a lot about police procedure. So she sent me, I think it was about 63,000 words. And, it's a clean Word document. And I will go through and I'll tell her, well, it was her, exactly, okay, so this wouldn't happen. A police detective is not working by themselves with going after a serial killer. There's going to be bosses. You're going to have to do a canvas of this neighborhood. You're going to, I explain how it would actually pan out in real life. And I also tell them, it's like, hey, it's your story. There's always some leniency and some leeway, some artistic, freedom there, but you should know where true north is. So with that book, I probably put in about 60, 70 comments. And then what I'll do is I'll set up a Zoom or a Skype, and we'll go through everything after they've had a chance to read it. And then if they have any more questions, I'm more than happy to help them out. And I haven't had anybody dissatisfied yet. Everybody's been real happy. So you have your own cop, more or less, to help you out.
Yeah, it's interesting. What's like the most common thing that people mess up when it comes to portraying a life of a police officer in film or TV or books that you've seen?
Boy, where do I start? A lot of it's really way off. Um, Starting out perhaps with rank, in most movies or books, or TV shows, what you see is there's always that one renegade detective that's out, chasing down bad guys and car chases, kicking down doors and shootings. Most detectives are what we call suit and tie detectives, where they do a ton of boring, monotonous, tedious work. Very, very rarely are they chasing anyone. They are the ones that will be doing the interviewing and interrogation of somebody, of a suspect or like a witness on a crime scene. But they're one of the last ones to get to a crime scene. The first people that respond to a crime scene, like say a shooting, that's popular on TV or in books. You get sent to a shooting, it's the police officers on the street that get sent to the shooting, to the homicide, to the, whatever dynamic situation. And if it's something big, a sergeant gets dispatched to that situation. And that, for the most part, it's all contained and controlled before they even step foot there. My wife loves different crime shows on TV, and a lot of them are just god awful. Say you're serving a search warrant, and they have the SWAT team. They want nothing to do with. Sometimes they'll have police officers on the scene, but just for containment on the outside. But they have the equipment, they have the training, and it's a bunch of like-minded people that train. That's their job. That's what they do day in, day out. And the last thing they want is a detective or a detective lieutenant wearing a windbreaker with a bulletproof vest, like pushing to the front of the line. I got the door. That's never going to happen,
Sure.
ever. So that's completely ridiculous. Also, any kind of interrogations with a suspect, say, okay, somebody gets arrested for killing, John Doe. They're brought into the station or detective headquarters. They're handcuffed behind their backs. Before you know it, the cop or the detective has his gun or her gun in the bad guy's mouth. They're hitting him across the head. All that stuff would land the cop or the detective in jail. All this is recorded. Every kind of interrogation is recorded either with audio, and most rooms where there are interrogations / interviews of suspects, it's also video. And the district attorney is going to be looking at this video. The defense attorney is going to be looking at this video. If it goes to trial, the jury is going to be looking at this video. So you got to be real careful of what you do in that box.
Sure.
And so TV is, like I said, in movies, that's complete fiction. A good interrogator, a detective or officer, they just crawl inside the head of the bad guy. And it isn't done through screaming and, hitting people and doing whatever. It's not kissing their ass all the time either. It's just very slow, methodic, reading body language. And like I said before, actually crawling inside this, most of the time, twisted person's head. And the more heinous the crime, the more difficult that gets. But through training and experience, you have detectives and officers that I knew if I wanted a confession from somebody, it's like, hey, I know who to ask. It's like, I know, like, if Dan had that interrogation, 90% of the time he'd get a confession, and the bad guy or gal would be thanking him at the end. They became best friends. Everything was great, but it's all how you sell it.
Sure.
But but there's rules too. I mean, Miranda is often misunderstood and misportrayed in TV and movies. that you have the right to remain silent, da da da
Right.
da. And that's given in a custodial interrogation before the suspect answers questions. So A, you have to be under arrest, and B, the officer or detective has to be asking questions about the crime. So a lot of times, you'll see it where they're on the street and the officer is putting handcuffs. It's like, you have the right to remain silent. But I was like, no, we don't do that at all there. Very rarely. Or the exact opposite, where it's Hawaii 5-0 and they got the guy in the one room and they're kicking him around and kicking him off his chair. And Miranda's completely forgotten about, but they're breaking out a bunch of other laws anyway, so I guess it doesn't matter. And probably the other thing that really gets misrepresented is officer involved shootings, where a police officer has to shoot somebody.
Okay.
And you see there's an officer involved shooting where, say, they shoot and kill somebody. There's a gunfight. It could be anything from a traffic stop and the guy just comes out blazing. I was a sergeant for the last 17 years of my career. I worked in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I was the incident commander for 7 of those, where an officer was forced to shoot and kill somebody. Again, I think we've only had a couple of detectives ever that have ever done anything like that. It doesn't happen very often, unless the detective is in a specialty unit such as Vice or some kind of undercover capacity, which doesn't happen statistically a lot. But anyways, what happens is if there's something like that happens, obviously you contain the scene. It is a homicide. 99.9% of the time, it's going to be a justified homicide. But the legal definition of homicide is one human being taking the life of another human being. So the investigation kicks off, and you're going to have all different kinds of entities there. You're going to have the district attorney and his or hers. They have their own investigators. Whatever police department is going to be investigating this, they have to come. Usually the state crime lab, state investigators, they will come. The department where this occurred, their internal affairs division comes and investigates as well. So you have about 2 or 3 different distinct investigations going on at once. To make a long story short, that officer isn't going to see the street again for a good 6 months to a year. They're going to be riding, we call it riding the pine, where you're just sitting behind a desk doing desk work. And that's to protect them. The last thing that officer needs is to go back out on the street and get involved in another shooting. Well, that one hasn't been resolved yet.
Right. And in the movies, they're out there the next day saying, "Put me in, Lieutenant. I still got to finish this."
Sometimes the same night. I'm like, are you kidding me? They go have a coffee and donuts and high five, and then they're back out. And I'm like, no.
That's funny.
But I was helping a couple of authors with that because they had those in their books. And I said, well, you know what? Your artistic license can give you some time traveling. You can fast forward, say, 4 months or 5 months. And in the meantime, you could give that cop marital problems. You can give him a drinking problem. You can give him problems with his kids. I mean, there's a multitude of things that the author could do with this time with their character. So sometimes that's sorely misrepresented.
Yeah, that's a great point. So you've done a lot in your professional career. Now it's got sort of 2 paths to it, right? The creative side with being an author and an advisor to authors, and then a police officer. Many would think those are 2 different things. So I'm curious if you had to summarize, all of that, your whole professional journey and everything it entails in 3 words. What would your 3 words be?
Well, the 3 words that I would think of is interesting, difficult, and ever evolving.
God, throwing a hyphenated one in there, sneaking it in.
Yeah, I sure did.
So interesting, difficult, and ever evolving. Can you explain those a little bit?
Well, interesting. I think one of the great things about police work was that almost every day was different. Yeah, you had a lot of the same type of calls, and sometimes the same people. I was lucky enough where I was working in a big city where we had lots of crime and lots of action, lots of car chases, Milwaukee has its challenges. I'll just say that. But as a cop and as a sergeant, it kept you busy. And I worked with a really good bunch of people, and I worked for a very good department. I was very proud of it. But like I said, you would have your boring times, but you also had your times where you're literally going 100 miles an hour after a bad guy. Where if I worked in a smaller department, sometimes that almost never happened. So I was kind of baptized in fire. It was very interesting. And then, like I said before, what happened was I saw my career coming to an end, and I had to think of what am I going to do next. So I wrote the book about how to buy a car. Then I went through a very nasty divorce, like most cops do. So I wrote a book about that. And then a friend of mine, another sergeant, was working on his PhD. He was getting sick of writing that, so he wrote a post-apocalyptic fiction. And I thought to myself, well, I could do that. So I wrote a post-apocalyptic book. And I was in the middle of writing a sequel to that. And I got involved in Facebook with a writers group called 20 Books to 50K. And I had people asking me for advice. It's like, well, would the police do this? Would the police do that? And I heard more than one time, you should really write a book about this. So I did. So I wrote the book Cops and Writers from the Academy to the Street. Then I made a business out of that. And I want to keep on going. I've got momentum now and I want to keep that up. So yeah, my life has been interesting. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, and all that interesting and the difficult times, right, makes it ever evolving. You're getting into new stuff.
Yeah, difficult. I'm the son of two Irish immigrants. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. We didn't have a lot of money, but we did okay. We moved to Wisconsin when I was a freshman in high school, and I didn't realize it, but there was a lot of animosity. We moved to a little town, so I'm moving from Chicago, suburb of Chicago, to a town of 7,000 people. And I thought they were all going to be like really friendly farmers. Everything was going to be great. It was the exact opposite. I was the kid from Chicago. I was in a fight when I first got there every day in school. So I started out kind of difficult, and then going through, life. Like I said, you got your degree in sociology. I got married young. I worked a lot of not so great jobs. I was a 24-hour restaurant manager. I sold cars. I bartended, but it gave me a lot of good life experience too. And, personally, I went through a bad divorce. I had cancer when I was 40. So I survived that. I survived a couple of like really close calls at work, and still here.
Yeah. Yeah. And kudos to you, because I keep thinking about every time you've said in this interview, someone told me I should write a book about it. And so I did, and how often people hear that and they're told something and they just brush it off. Whereas you're saying, okay, I'll do it. And you sort of like challenge accepted. And then you create that thing and put it into the world, which is, it's just impressive.
Most people have some kind of book in them, but they just never get it out.
Sure.
Most people have something interesting about their life. Most people have gone through some experience that other people would find interesting or educational, just from getting out and living. I'm not unique at all in any of this.
I think a lot of it's just the self-limiting thing, right? If you grew up in a family and you haven't seen anyone in your circle write a book, you don't think it's possible. You think of it as you need the New York agent and publishing house. You're not thinking about Amazon or ACX and Kindle Unlimited and all the things we've talked about here. So it takes them hearing a story like yours to know it's possible. And then I think more and more people will do it.
Yeah, it's like a lot of is vanity. And there are what we call vanity publishers out there. That's like, yeah, you know what? I'll take, Myles, I'll take $5,000 from you and I'll get the book edited. I'll throw a cover on there and I'll do a month's worth of marketing. Sound like a plan? Oh, and I'll take, most of the profit. And people jump at that. And it's just frustrating for me. There's a lot of snake oil salesmen when it comes to publishing. Not all, but there's quite a few out there that are, because there's people that, like you just said, they didn't know that you can go out and do it yourself. There's a learning curve. And probably the first book you're going to write isn't going to be great. It's not going to be your magnum opus by any stretch. But the more you do it, the better you're going to get. And the more, for me, it was just making contacts with people and getting mentored and just, listening to a ton of podcasts, YouTube videos, whatever I could get my hands on and how to learn the business.
Yeah, that's so important. Just like anything, you're not going to be an expert on day one. It takes that commitment to it, for sure.
Yep, absolutely.
So if people want to reach out to you to learn more about how you've done it, maybe to be mentored by you or to have you advise on their, police type piece of writing like you do, where can they find you?
I have a Facebook group called Cops and Writers. I have about 2,000 people in that Facebook group, where it's other law enforcement. I've got a couple of coroners. I've got forensic people. I've got a couple of attorneys and a bunch of authors that just, are asking questions. You can get in touch with me. I have a website, copsandwriters.com, www.copsandwriters.com. And if you want to email me, you can get me at sarge@copsandwriters.com.
Perfect. Well, Patrick, we appreciate you sharing your story with us here on the podcast and look forward to sending people your way.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
All right, that's a wrap for this episode of Relish the Journey. Thank you all so much for listening, and thank you again to Patrick for being our guest. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, all of those wonderful engagements with this show. That helps us grow our audience and continue to spread this mantra of Relish the Journey. Until next time, everyone, cheers.